There's a movement of the soul that can be so small, yet cause so much damage. It's a movement that at some point touches all of us, whether or not we know it. And it certainly hit me a couple of years ago at a wedding for my cousin. Now, the wedding went fine. It was beautiful, actually. It was during the reception, however, that people would come up to me, and at first it seemed like a positive. They would look shocked, and they would say, "Oh my gosh, you're a young priest." But then that would quickly transition into complaints about this or that teaching of the gospel, resulting in a declaration of, "Well, this is why I left the church." Now, it wasn't one or two people, which can be expected. I mean, anywhere you go, that'll happen. This continued the entire night long, by the fire pit, in the reception area, at the dinner table, on the dance floor. Yes, I was on a dance floor. But what I noticed at a certain point was the joy and the levity that had so filled my heart in the beginning of the evening was giving way to a kind of heaviness. And I looked out at this ocean of people, and I thought, how can the church ever reach all of these hearts? How? It just felt impossible. And physically, my shoulders actually slumped down to a lower position. What I was experiencing, the movement I'm talking about, is discouragement. Discouragement is a dangerous thing because it attacks our hope, which is a foundation of the Christian life. Wars have been won and lost over this spiritual condition. Statistics will say that survivors stranded at sea who die first are invariably the ones who yield quickest to despair. The same is true for those who are battling serious illnesses. But the problem that we're faced with in today's culture and society is that discouragement is everywhere right now. Jordan Peterson was being interviewed by Piers Morgan about a comment made by Olivia Wilde, who accused Jordan Peterson of being the hero to loner incel men. And the word incel is the coming together of involuntarily celibate. So in other words, Olivia Wilde was saying, you're a messiah for losers, is the insult that she hurled at him. And so Pierce was asking him about this. And if you watch Jordan, his eyes, they look up, as you can tell he's going in his mind back to all the disaffected men whom he's treated over decades of his life. And suddenly tears start trickling down his face, and he says to Pierce with broken voice, "It's very difficult to understand how demoralized people are. It's really difficult to see constantly how many people are dying for lack of an encouraging word." As challenging as that is, it's nothing new though. This condition is something that the prophet Habakkuk himself is experiencing. He's a just man living in a world that is all around him overrun by evil. His own people are no longer faithful. The foreign nations are closing in on him. The violence is spreading everywhere in the streets. Their Jewish identity is a mess. And he's looking at all of it the way that, obviously more severe than I was looking at the wedding crowd, but he's overwhelmed. And what he's struggling with the most is, in the face of such unrelenting evil, how can God be so silent? And Timothy isn't far behind. Paul, in the second reading, is writing what is most likely his last epistle before he's going to be martyred by the Roman Emperor Nero. And Timothy is just about to enter the darkest period of his life. Nero is going to persecute Christians relentlessly. He's going to strap them to poles in the streets. He's going to light them on fire at night to illumine the pathway for the Roman citizens to walk. And Timothy is going to have to address all of this without his mentor Paul and his spiritual director. Now, it would be awesome if Paul took this moment and said, "Don't worry, God is going to wipe Nero out and nothing bad is going to happen. Or run this parish program and all your problems will disappear. But he doesn't. Paul doesn't say that to him. What does he say? Timothy, stir into flame the gift of God that you have through the imposition of my hands. He's talking about his ordination. You were given a gift, a grace. Stir that into flame. Now, the same could be said for all of us at our baptism. Remember, like we literally give a lit candle over to a Godfather, and we tell the child to keep that flame burning brightly. That is meant for a reason. Paul's words echo God's own response to Habakkuk. God says to the prophet, do not be rash. In other words, don't give up prematurely just because it looks bad. If it delays, he says to Habakkuk, wait for it, meaning act like the miracle is right around the corner. And then he says to him, the just one because of his faith shall live. But the faith isn't just faith in an abstract. The Hebrew word is emunah, which means faithfulness. It's a faith lived in action every day. In other words, keep your head down and just keep moving. Don't cease hoping. Believe, because I'm coming. Are you satisfied with that? I'm not, to be honest. Jesus takes it a little further. He said in the gospel, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you would say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Okay, you guys want to know something embarrassing? When I was in college at Franciscan University, just figuring my faith out, I looked around me, and then I reached out to a bush, like Harry Potter. And I was like, I believe, Jesus, unlike these incels, move. And then nothing happened. And undoubtedly people looked at me and was like, this is why we had asylums. Because that's not what he means, right? What he's trying to say is that give me even the little bit that you have, and I can use that. Think of the little boy on the mount who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. What did Jesus do with it? He fed 5,000 people. Think of the guy who cut a tree down and then shaped it into 2 beams. What did Jesus do with that? He died on it and saved the world. So your commitment to the covenant in a culture that holds the gospel in contempt, folks, it matters. Your faith matters. When everyone around you is walking away from Jesus Christ, your decision to stay matters. Because Jesus is going to use that. But you have to believe that and wait for the miracle that's right around the corner. I'll close with one example. I know I've mentioned her a few times, but we just had her feast day this last week. And so here we go. Saint Therese is an example of this. She led an extraordinarily hidden life. She was a cloistered Carmelite nun who died at the age of 24. She barely had time to get anything going. At the time of her death, she was known only to her biological family and the sisters in her convent because she entered the convent as a teenager and she never left its doors. But within a few years of her death, she had a worldwide reputation. She was declared a saint and a doctor of the church. When a reliquary of her bones was brought to the United States in the 1990s, millions of people responded to it. When the same reliquary was brought to Ireland, almost the entire country moved to see it. And she even now, in a place she never heard of, like Ridley Park, is featured on the back wall of our own church. How is that possible? How is that possible? Because every day of her life, where she lived, what she said, how she dressed, the way she treated other people, and the way that she died, she loved God and she used those moments to live her faith. And then God just took care of the rest. She never saw this coming. So why would you be any different? Now, we might not be able to fix every problem in the world or convince everyone we meet of the joy and the life that we find in Christ, but we can always choose Christ and trust that he will use that to do amazing things. Now, next week, I'm actually going to stand up in front of all of the masses to speak about how applying our efforts strategically towards goals can speak to this, because Jesus calls us to be faithful but not aimless, and I want to aim at something. And if we're going to put our fidelity toward the mission for which he sent us, I'm convinced that he's going to bless every little effort that we do. So stay tuned, because there's going to be more about that next week.